Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the December installment of our 2022 Phosphorescence Poetry Series. Emily Dickinson used the term phosphorescence to describe a divine spark or an illuminating light. And we launched this series in 2021 in celebration of the power of poetry to spark the imagination and ignite transformation. We're thrilled to be able to bring you both established and emerging poets from all over the world in this virtual format so that we can all enjoy the spark they bring to our imaginations. So this evening is the final reading of our 2022 series. It's brought us all together this year to hear the work of 27 fantastic poets from around the world. So my name is Jane Wald. I'm Executive Director of the Emily Dickinson Museum, and I'm really thrilled to be with you tonight. Since we can see those of us on the Zoom as presenters cannot see our audience, so we hope you'll consider sharing words of affirmation and appreciation for our poets in the chat during the readings. And you can start right now by telling us where you're tuning in from. Tonight, we'll hear original work from two poets, followed by a Q&A session. So we hope you'll participate by posing your own questions to the poets. Just think of them as you follow along this evening during the readings. And because the chat can be a pretty busy place, and it's becoming a busy place right now, we'll look for your questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat. And you can feel free to pop them in there at any point in the evening. So we've got people from Tasmania. I'm glad I got to say that as the first place this evening. New York, Wisconsin, Michigan, Oakland, California, Pennsylvania, Salem, Massachusetts. Someone joining us from Harriet Beecher Stowe's place just down the road in Hartford. Someone from Warsaw, from Brunswick, Maine. Rochester, New York, Ennis, Ireland, and the list will continue in the chat. So please keep it up and tell us where you're coming from. So one last housekeeping item, we're using Zoom's live transcription feature, which creates captions to the best of the computer's ability. So please forgive any errors there and feel free to toggle subtitles on and off for yourself by visiting the live transcript button in the toolbar, usually down on the right-hand side. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce to you our featured poets who will read one after the other without any interruption from me. First, Cori A. Winrock is a poet, multimedia essayist. She's the author of Little Envelopes of Earth Conditions from Alice James' books. Her book-length lyric essay, Alterations, will soon be published by Transit Books as part of their Undelivered Lectures series. She is the winner of the Boston Review Poetry Prize, and her essay on twins was selected as a notable essay in Best American Essays of 2020. Her work has appeared in Poetry, the Best New Poets Anthology, Bennington Review, Black Warrior Review, West Branch, Fairy Tale Review, and elsewhere. Cori Winrock holds an MFA from Cornell University and a PhD in Literature and Creative Writing from the University of Utah. She's currently a visiting assistant professor at Western Washington University. And tonight she joins us from Bellingham, Washington. So welcome, Cori.
Thanks.
Also with us is Eleanor Hooker, who is an Irish poet and writer. Her third poetry collection of Ochre and Ash from Daedalus Press is the recipient of the 2022 Michael Hartnett Award. Her other poetry collections with Daedalus are A Tug of Blue, The Shadow Owner's Companion, which was shortlisted for the Strong Shine Award for Best First Irish Collection in 2012. Her chapbook, Legion, from Bonifant Press, was published in 2021, and Where Memory Lies, a 2021 recipient of the Markovitz Award, is due for publication by Bonifant Press in 2023. Eleanor's poetry has been published internationally in Ireland, the UK, the United States, Holland, Romania, Hungary, India, Australia, and is forthcoming in Italy also. Her work has appeared in literary journals, including Poetry Island Review, Poetry Review, PN Review, Agenda, The North, The Stinging Fly, Winter Papers, New Hibernia Review, the New England Review, which is forthcoming, and also soon to be from Archipelago. Eleanor is currently a PhD candidate at the University of Limerick. She holds an MPhil in creative writing from Trinity College, Dublin, an MA in cultural history from the University of Northumbria, and a BA from the Open University. Eleanor is a fellow of the Linnean Society of London. She's a helm press officer for Loch Derg Lifeboat. She began her career as an intensive care nurse and trained as a midwife at the National Maternity Hospital in Dublin. So tonight she joins us from Drumnair, County Tipperary, Ireland. We have posted links to, we've posted the bios and links to works of these poets will also appear in the chat tonight as they read. So first, Cori, over to you.
Thanks for that great introduction, Jane, and for inviting us to come take part in this reading. Eleanor, I'm really excited to be reading with you and to have the chance to get to know you a little bit in our pre-meetings for this. This is especially meaningful to me to have the chance to read from this book at the Dickinson House. So much of the work that I did on this collection was thinking through Dickinson, her use of variants and these plus signs that kind of rove around in her poems. Gave me a lot of space for thinking through nonlinearity of narrative and just the way that she approached grief across different moments in her life. There was like a big burst of stuff she wrote through. And then when she revisited it 10, 15 years later, she really thought differently about that. And this collection for me was really thinking about what is the difference between immediate up close grief and then grief as it kind of moves across time. So I'm very nervous and very excited to be reading in this series. I'm going to start with the first poem in this collection, Little Envelope of Earth Conditions. It came out right before the pandemic hit, so I didn't have a chance to do much reading from it or have a book tour, so that's also another reason it's really exciting and celebratory. The first poem in the collection is an assignment I actually really like to give a lot of my students, which is to write a poem with a title that comes from a clickbait article. In this case, I had just moved to Salt Lake City for my PhD, and I'm from the East Coast and had never really been out west and felt like I had landed on the moon. And I was talking to my sister about how the mountains looked fake and what was I doing so far away from home. So I Googled what would happen to your body in space without a spacesuit, which is sort of how I felt that I was not protected or prepared to be in this landscape. And so that is where the title of this poem comes from. It has an epigraph. What you say in a body. You can say nothing outside of this body. What would happen to your body in space without a spacesuit? Whose foreheads should we kiss to check for fever? Whose memories are those we keep so close to our wrists? The stars are only us before us, afforded by so much distance. We have drawn pictures of such animals we have never seen. We have become such sky-slung animals in our most untender moments. Our bodies have been exposed to all sorts of things. The stars don't believe in weeping us to sleep or singing us in to a new season. In space, we imagine we are holding each other by the hand instead of holding our own hands over our mouths. To grieve, to be grieving, No one is going to come tell us it's not safe to be holding our breath. We learn to sleep with our hands in the dark of strangers' mouths, keep our heads singing in hopes of bringing our lost helmets back. How warm-blooded the moon must still seem when seen from the earth. The collection has a bunch of sequences in it. There's a series of how-tos, how to sew a spacesuit, how to remove a spacesuit, along with a series of epistolary poems that are addressed to a blank, essentially, to a number of people that are stand-ins. And I am going to read the first of those that appear in the book. And it was written while I was on a residency that University of Utah affords us to go to in Montana, in the middle of nowhere in a ghost town. There's no internet. There's no cell service, really. It was my very first time being away from my at the time, small children. And I suddenly realized that I wasn't invincible, that somehow I had you become a parent, you sort of feel like you have to be invincible to save everybody. And I realized that I wasn't. And so I kind of had to deal with my grief for the first time, really, about losing my mom and losing part of a pregnancy. And so this is the poem that came from that. A daughter drafts a letter from Earth. Departure. Dear blank, what repair, what weather system permitting mourning, some music, the hollow-bodied dress of a loved one. What worry I do nothing humbly, dream the branches of your bloodlines as sunprint, feel creased as, what touch I've nailed to me instead of all these cliff swallows, their mud nests, suffocating the eaves. What refusal to see ourselves to sleep until we rinse our feet, until someone has tied red threads around my ankle to ward off a new year. In the field dark, the storm hovers, the cows sound a riled sadness. What heat lightning rising, reverberant sky. I'm radioing from myself to myself. Endless desert where I thought a drop-dead winter should be. Some nights, this is all I can do to keep from. I drink myself into a threat to sleep off my dress by morning. What static electricity when we're still in the eye of it. Thunder slow dilating overhead like a train whistle. The lake swallowing the thrill of lightning lines. My only desire, a desire to touch no one for a year. Let the storm drag me bodiless into the hush of long grasses, fields brushed with sage, wait for someone more remorseful to pass through. I'm leaving with the perfume rising off my hair, 2 children asleep in their nests. This next piece, when I wrote it, the spacesuit ended up in the final line. And that's when I really realized that the book wanted to deal with this idea of the moon in space. Up until then, when I did what would happen to your body in space, I just was kind of like goofing around and writing, can you write a really lyric poem when you have like a BuzzFeed article that you're writing off of? But as I was writing this next one, I didn't expect the spacesuit to arrive. And when it did, I really realized that being on the moon felt like what it was to be a griever, that you're looking back on a planet that everybody else is living on while you're kind of up floating around in space. And so that really shifted the whole trajectory for the collection. The poem has an epigraph. And I should say a lot of the poems have these epigraphs, and they are what I consider stitched in with plus signs, using this idea of Dickinson's variants. But I don't actually list who the epigraph comes from until the end of the book. I really wanted this idea of how we pull from the commonplace and stitch it into our own work and our own thinking without having these kinds of bigwig thinkers, kind of their names attached to the beginning of the poem. But I will say this comes from Macbeth, but if you read it in the book, you wouldn't know that unless you went to the back. Innocent sleep, sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of care. Landscape in which I am obliterated by light. Nothing fits properly in this space, little sleeve. Are you watching? The way I'm crawling across the walls of every room of the house like a wet, near dead thing, like the sad sack that I am. Little sleeve, the dead are everywhere in my poems, and I've forgotten the living body is a necessary antecedent to landscape. Landscape of unfreezing cells, of new ringing forests, landscape of remorseless heat and dry light. Little sleeve, spring is coming and dragging its thaw and snow shedding stink. Little sleeve, the yard is dismantling its panoptic mantling of white, and I want to be sucked into the mud's black hole vacuum instead of mapping our way to another doctor. I swear I once heard someone say there are only so many images a body can take before the skeleton is stolen in light. Is it a given that every TV emergency ends in joyous resuscitation? Little sleeve, I left my teenage bones to winter as x-rays in a folder in a drawer. There's a run in the quietness of every pair of my stockings. Little sleeve, so many bodies are denied as bodies, and your body is not even. We are animals are being resurrected from DNA, and the youngest ever brain frozen for a new body to be built for her 500 years into a future. Little sleeve, is this really what we call saving? Across an ocean, drones are banqueting as bees, as bombs in bridal arrangements, and we call this progress. The satellites are monitoring our devolving. Little sleeve, how does love appear in no gravity? Like love, like love. Little sleeve, no one has told me what happens when I reemerge to a thawing earth. What happens when a daughter returns from the underworld to the exact moment, the exact same grove of known trees, but no mother, no child. Little sleeve of her own accord, little ravel. I've dug up the bulb of our girlhood body from the frozen yard, as if everything stays perennial, as if aster rather than ash. I've buried our hands in my mouth. Little sleeve, always on the cusp of these two bright emergency rooms, Demeter's gorgeous force on the brink. Come and get me, I'd like to hear myself say, to be contagious, to be uncontained. Little sleeve, you are distilled to a certificate we signed before we could leave the hospital with your sister. Little, sing to me, little, sleeve me tender. My throat is worn slender as a seam, my heart gone to seed. Little, it's impossible to turn around to tell if what is spilling from us is water or salt or star. Little sleeve, your legs are dragging behind me. I swear nothing will fit in this spacesuit but us. I just feel like being on Zoom is like doing stand up to a quiet audience. Like there's just no way of knowing what's going on, which immediately makes me want to like fill it in with something silly because my poems are so, they're kind of exploring a dark thing, which I know Eleanor said is true also for her work and what I've seen from reading it. So I've got to like add a little bit of silliness in between. The next poem, I really just was thinking about owl pellets and how weird they are in general as an object that is created, but also about, you know, in Salt Lake, I spent a lot of time in the cemetery walking because I lived near there and it was a great place to just wander around and and it was somebody else's dead. So I felt freed by that somehow. Like I could sort of be present and in this space. But weirdly, my kids spent a lot of time there too, just because, especially once the pandemic started, and they weren't in playgrounds or walking. So they spent a lot of time playing, but they really thought of that as like a fun place to go. And that's a little bit where this poem comes from. Eulogy. I carried one grief while courting another, because the moon pulled in a tide of early dirt, because I could not bury both my mother and a child, because the living child wanted to go to that place, Mama, with the beautiful stones where people leave flowers and presents. And now we were up each night with her sleepless fear of falling into those dark holes. Because the dirt was too, and my hands were. I'm throwing red thread over my shoulders, salting my grievances. Listen, in the woods we are banished from, the owls are giving back the bones of the ones, if they lived, we might have lived. I'm just going to read two more pieces. This next piece comes from a misheard line in someone else's poem, kind of like when you mishear song lyrics. Abad for future resurrection. I arbor glyph our initials into the trees, and the little white dress in my heart says, bang, bang, lays herself down like a crime scene. I imagine this is how it feels when the small church of birds in your hands refuses to lift its hem of song. Never mind the pins and needles attending my body as if felled. Never mind the aspen psalms, the burls their zillion unblinking eyes. Your perfume brays off until I am sugarless under the sheer force of unfloral light. Light so pre-winter low, it splits the wood to shadow, splits the wood back to salt. Even for those of us who kept such vigil moons, no arrival, no avowal. The forest refuses to laurel its leaves around our chalk outlines. And I'm not drunk enough to admit this must feel like when God stops talking to even the most devoured in faith. Love, let me pin me open before you begin the autopsy. Our morning fog voices coming through my coat as so many hand-embroidered ambulances. And I thought I would end on the last poem in the book, which I'm going to try and hold this up, is just a bunch of lines strung together with these plus signs, the stitches that move throughout the text. And that I really came from thinking through how Dickinson talked about sewing in her own works. The opening is a kind of like a variant, I guess, on a Dickinson line about how the bird's whistle stitches into the air. But it's the last of this series that I was writing about these how-tos, how to sew a spacesuit, how to take off a spacesuit. And I really thought the book would end on how to remove a spacesuit. I thought there was this idea that if to be a griever is to wear a spacesuit, and sort of crossed also with being pregnant and new motherhood is to have this protective space that when I felt better about grief, I would take the spacesuit off. And so I wrote how to remove a spacesuit, and the final line of that poem is, I'll gather my daughters around the ordinary like a birthday. And I thought that would be it. I would feel really good. And but I started to really realize in thinking through Dickinson that grief gets different, but it doesn't really get better. It changes. And so I wanted to honor that. And this poem's title, How to Preserve a Spacesuit, is a little bit about how to have that grief with you and honor it and also not wear it. And I took the epigraph for this poem from an actual preservation catalog and an instruction from that, which is never try to move the suit alone. Always involve at least 2 people. How to preserve a spacesuit. The birds are whistling better stitches into the wind, fastening us to the meadow, to the edge of the lake, where we kneel to fill each spacesuit with flowers, then light them on fire. Send their bodies off into the water. I want the dead to say things. I want the dead to say things as they are, a singular motion of an axe to split the wood in half, to sting, to extinguish. It's more like a wet leaf pressed to the chest, cold stethoscope, the heartbeat turned inside out. On the shore, always the ones whose grief is a train whistle reiterating overhead. In the lake, always the dead saying quarantine, the inconsolable. Slow burn rising, no moon, until we uproot the birds' errant stitches, snip sung threads so we can sleep with their song in our own dry beds. Then daylight, new suture. Then our spacesuits surfacing, washing up again, whole again in the lake's cold skin. I reach down to lift our helmets, full of the wind which keeps us warm. I put my mouth to our wrist mirrors and the light does its slow graze. I compress our chests, turn our bodies to flood the flowers back into the meadow. On our knees again, we uproot this garment again, little ache again. This time we take it apart. This time again, we begin to make do, to mend. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. Gosh, that was beautiful, Cori. Absolutely fabulous. When I was reading your poetry earlier, it's just beautiful. It's such an honor to be here from very frozen Loch Derg, and thank you very much to all at the museum for inviting me to read. I think more than any poet, Emily Dickinson understood isolation and loneliness and worry about your writing and about the craft. And so I'm going to start by reading a poem by a man called Graham Allen, who lifted me up when I was feeling fraught about my writing. And he's a great guy. And it's kind of, this is paying it forward. And I talked to the museum earlier and they said I could do this. So Graham is a professor of English in UCC. And every so often I would write to him and say, help. And he says, you know, get a grip. So I'm reading his poem now, Pandora's Box. Risk is what is at the bottom of the box, since hope is hazard in its Sunday best. There is part of you still wants to wake to a new sky out of a new window, to new eyes to a glistening world. But the chances of that have diminished. And when they do arrive, you let them slip like a book purchased, but left unread. The clouds are full of a translucent light and recall the majesty of morning, but you have to force yourself to stay. There's too much innocence involved. Life is no longer an open field. Youth is a pile of neglected photos. The thing you quest for does not fit and comes at an inconvenient time. Rain clouds gather, the light darkens, the moment of arresting beauty fades. And that's by Graham Allen. And that's because he's just amazing. And I want everybody to know his work too. In Ireland, a lot of poets talk about their origin poems or writing from a place of hurt or a wound. And in Irish folklore, if a child is stung by a bee, it's a sign that they're going to be a poet and also that they're going to be a messenger and that they convey messages from the other world to this. And so this is my origin poem, Self-Portrait in a Honeybee's Eye. In the version my mother tells, one hung in the still air, hummed above my crib, its saddlebags yellow laden. She shooed it, she says, but not before it tasted my lip. And that is why, my mother says, I am chosen to wheedle with words. I recall its curved fur and my infant reflection repeated in its compound eyes, how it hung in the air, still above me. And when it landed, the secrets that tumbled from its saddlebag drove into my lip. And that is why I speak messages from the other world to this. It is why, when in my honeybee coat, you cannot know me, but grasp the sting deep inside me may eventually kill me. And as I tremble from flower to disguise, lost in a copse of words, I hum who I am. Ireland for a long time wasn't a place for young or old or any kind of woman. It was just a place where women seemed to be punished for just being, or they could be incarcerated for being a single unmarried mother, for even being pretty, because she was considered tempting. And a lot of women were incarcerated in mother and baby homes and convents. And so this poem is called Inside These Convent Walls, and the epigraph are lines by Emily Dickinson. They put me in the closet because they liked me still. From behind the wainscot, the girl in the wall asks, what colour? I tell her duck egg. That way she knows we're shut in the drawing room. The girl in the drawing room wall is forbidden. The girl in the wall was put there too, for her own good. The girl in the wall can hear fishes breathe. She listens to the sea shushing back and forth, the same old, who do you think you are? She climbs into a sarcophagus to tell me of stones tumbling from heaven in a storm, of omens carried inland on a sea breeze, of winter rooted in a heart. The girl in the wall was put there by Mother Abyss. We heed one another. We would never say, silence, your stories bore me. The girl in the wall shuns the world, but endures me, her deformed shadow puppet. At dawn, we sing, morning bells are ringing, morning bells are ringing, ding, dang, dong, ding, dang, dong. And on the same theme, there's an American poet from North Carolina called Jeannie Tominick, and she makes the most astounding art. And occasionally I respond to that and vice versa. She's just a wonderful woman. And she made a painting called Well-Worn Wings. And this is my response to that poem, or to that artwork, I should say. Well-worn wings. That cabinet in my mind, where I put the things I'd rather not consider, is almost full. Row upon row of stones stacked behind its vast yew doors, collapsing on themselves daily, like bones in a graveyard. The cabinet sits above high water, in a back room named Unutterable. I didn't name the room and don't know who did, but I'm conversant with its synonyms. The creature that guards the room is not an eel or a terrible fish. It just is, and occasionally is not. Where I trace the damp blue walls, a soft mold chalks the paint with my impressions. This room is a dark and broken sea, where disturbed waters drown time. I catch sight of my well-worn wings, their hooked veins patched blue and green, old wounds. With effort, they wrench me from the water's pull, settle me on a rusty pecan protruding from the wall. Nearby, all my birds, obsidian and raven, caw, what, at the question of my unsettling. I unfeather back to the rachis. I pluck quills from my shoulder bones until, dismantled, I am back at source, flightless, woman, and unutterably sad. We have two dogs here. One is called Prof, short for professor, and the other is called Deputy Dog. And Prof has a very eclectic taste in books, and she's a great companion. She listens to my poems and she never offers critique, although she gets startled sometimes when she finds me walking down the avenue apparently talking to myself. And so this poem is called My Dog is Reading Nietzsche Again. I'm standing in the basement. The rooms above are packed with emptiness and silence. My life is hanging off its hinges, and my dog chooses to speak. Inexplicably, my dog chooses to speak in my other voice. I ask her, why speak now? She says the moment seemed proportionate. She sniffs the air, tells me she detects dread. May I? She asks, and when I nod, she walks in. So this is the hollow room, she says. Is this not every room in the doll's house you never owned? As I'm not permitted to speak in the hollow room, I nod. Was it ever thus? She asks. I point to the mirror, its black canvas. A nightmare, she says. She taps the glass, the barometer needle falls, and the atmosphere fails. Then the storm, and then the rain. I remember the caress of rain, that old comforter. She taps again. We watch time rewind, and those I've loved and lost arrive to take their seats in the delicate trees in the hollow room. They laugh, make meaningless bird sounds, sip the tea I serve, but being dead, they cannot see me. Make it stop, I say, and she does. Eventually, grief is the only spectre, and but for the echoes and incessant rain, nothing remains in this room. I need to see it, my dog says. Take me to the ballroom. We wait at the threshold. The dance is never ending. On one side, my many selves weave back and forth, tethered to an inaudible tune, and on the other, my many doubles regard us, tired of the same routine. These are not the facts of your life, my dog says, only interpretations. And those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music, she says, and I know she's been reading Nietzsche again. As we return to the edge, my dog inquires if I'm still dyslexic. I ignore her thoughtlessness and stride ahead. Persistent, she asks if I've heard the joke about the insomniac, dyslexic, agnostic, about the girl kept from sleep, wondering if there really was a dog. I ask my dog if she believes he's dead, and she says yes, he's dead. I don't know, this is such a strange poem. I don't know if it even needs an introduction. I have terrible nightmares, and they're fine because I feed off them and then I write poems. But I have this character who comes and she rocks in the corner of one of our bedroom. And one night my husband said, don't worry, tell me your dream. And I told him my dream, and he sat up all night and he said, never tell me your dreams again. So I don't tell him my dreams anymore, but she still visits and he says, is she here? So this is called Mirrored. She visited again last night. No pike this time. She was singing too, her song the sound of a heavy body dragging itself deadly up the stairs. Her melody not too dissimilar to that thud-thump heartbeat in my ears. She brought mirrors into my mind, and in my mind she filled the mirrors with crows, huge beaked, hungry crows that fed. And though I couldn't move, I kept my eyes open. I wasn't frightened. I knew sooner or later I'd wake, and she would have to take her mirrors and her crows, leaving my pulse behind. Some years ago, this is prior to COVID, one of my friends that I trained as a nurse with went to Sierra Leone to help with the Ebola crisis. I thought it was incredibly brave of her, especially she had very young children. And she wrote back and she asked me, could I help her with her blog and add humor? And I said, there's no way you can add humor to dealing with an Ebola crisis, especially the things you've been describing and my husband is hearing through his colleagues. So I said, just trust your instinct. It was just so dystopian, what she was dealing with. And she's all flesh and bone, but I think she was hewn from rock because she she just seemed to be able to deal with it. But this poem anyway is called Nailing Wings to the Dead. Since we nail wings to the dead, she calls ravens from the sky to inspect our work. For flight, they say, first remove their boots. She leans in, inspects a fresh hex behind my eyes, takes my feet and lays them on the fire to burn it out, roots first. We're the last, Babishka and me. We've survived on chance and bread baked from the last store of grain. And as we're out of both, we will die soon. They are gathering in the well. We disrobe. She hums whilst I nail her wings. She tells me a tale, her last gift. This dark stain, past kiss to kiss-stained fevered mouth, blights love, is pulsed by death watch beetles tick, timing our decay. They know this. They wait by water, gulping despair. The ravens keep watch. They say the contagion's here. They promise to take us first. Her tale done, we go winged and naked to the well. We hear them climbing the walls, caterwauling, but ravens are swift and swoop. Check the time. I'm not giving introductions to some of these because I think they're probably self-explanatory. This poem is called Encrypted. They put us in the crypt, my twin and I. She died before we were born, oh many years ago. I eat the dark so she can see me. She plucks an acorn from my iris, says my eyes are the precise color of forest floor she'd imagined. Tugging at my raven wings, she asks to keepsake one black feather. She swims in my sea skirt, and when she tires, gathers perfect pebbles. A collector, I think. I've resolved to collect you too, she murmurs, counting 6 fingers on her left hand. Last year, I was invited to write poems in response to Dante's Inferno, and so I wrote about the Purgatorio and Paradiso, and I'm going to read one. I'm going to read one in response to the Purgatorio. And you'll find there's a lot of ravens in this. My mother's family, her maiden name was Corbett, and it's really in her crest are 2 ravens. And so I think that's why they fly through so many of my poems. Purgatorio, a raven's elegy. A lifetime I have watched the dead pace the perimeter of this walled garden. Now I pace with them. We trace each stone in the high wall of purgatory. Perhaps our child is nestled here, or here, or here. This morning, the dead cluster in one corner, a flash of frightened light against the furthest wall. We hear it, the earth's labored cry, where she is cut and dug. A lament she has toiled for eternity. One presence attempts 3 times to take my hand, and 3 times her hand falls through mine, uncomforted. Strains of a raven's elegy rises from our throats. Our chorus is the earth's cry where she is cut and dug behind the boundary walls of this garden, whose sanctity is our tomb. We hear the swaddle drop and hear the earth catch her breath as each stilled birth is enfolded to her breast. For long may she cradle them, beseech, before the descent, the pandemonium. I'm going to read 2 last poems, one of mine and another in a paying forward. And so I think I might do something. What the pandemic did was it concentrated the mind. Many of my family members got sick and some died, and it was horrible. I've never attended a funeral through a computer before, but that's what we were reduced to. And so it makes you question what living is about or what being is about. So this poem, anyway, is called Living. Living, a sort of quantum mischief that answers to its own logic, even and especially when no question has been posed, we call being, sentient, alive. Life's blank delicacy is a fine gauze dressing we mark with our first breath, tear through with our last. Living is to be this side of what we imprudently imagine an impregnable blind. We are but sea-bleached stones warmed by the sun, held in each other's palm, loose in each other's heart, and miming unanswered murmurations, we startle the sky with our flight. And I'm going to finish with a poem bookended by another person, John Griffin, who this Monday launched his first book. He lives overseas, so he had no launch and no fanfare. He's wonderful. He's always supported me and hoisted me up by my bootstraps when I felt down about my work. He also happens to be my brother, and I'm one of 12 children, and he's next to me, way down the line, older than me, next to me, but he's been writing longer than I have. He's always sent me books to shore up my deficient education, and it's just a joy to finish this reading with a poem by John. Epoche. Did your love send me a window to look through, a key to turn, a door to unlock? The holly's new green shines through ferns and is a breath away from minted mist, from bonfires on All Souls' Night with berry eyes, blackthorn hair, and you in there, at the back of beyond, where men throw stones at their coats, and me lost here behind black mullions in casement light, not green enough for snow. Thank you.
Goodness, thank you so much, Eleanor and Cori. Those are just so touching and poems, so beautiful and so thick. With a kind of sensibility that will stay with us for a very long time. I think they are in a sense kind of searing and hopeful at the same time, in a sense. And I'm going to have a question about that a little bit in a little bit, but first, let me invite all of our viewers to share your questions in the Q&A. They won't get lost in the Q&A, but they might get overwhelmed in the chat. So please contribute your questions and things that you'd like to learn from Eleanor and Cori. I might like to start with, just your connection with Emily Dickinson's work is so palpable. But I wonder if each of you could share where your interest in, where did you first connect with Emily Dickinson? Where did your interest in Dickinson come from? And, did her poetry somehow pierce your own poet's imagination at some point? What part of her story or her work do you carry with you as an artist? And let me, if I could ask Eleanor if you could just tell us, where did you and Emily Dickinson connect?
Well, I first got introduced to Emily Dickinson at school, and we studied from this book. This was our poetry book in secondary school, and she was the only female in this book. And it was my English teacher, Mr. Mernan, wasn't really, he wanted us to import as much as we could into each poem that we read, whereas the curriculum had a prescribed set of questions that we had to ask of each poem, and he just allowed us to riff. And so it was wonderful. That was my first introduction, age 13. And then later on, you know, I was talking earlier about origin poems. I think every single one of Emily Dickinson's seems to be an attempt to get inside herself, or to get herself out of the way or of her own work. There's always seems to be a quest. And I thought, you know, if somebody can write like this in the 19th century, I think it's okay for me to write the kind of things I do now. A lot of people would call it confessional poetry, which I think is a pejorative term used to reduce certainly women's work. So I just let go. I used to self-censor. I was reading her today, and I was reading about her love of her dog as well, and you know, from the Jane Eyre novel. But I think she's given women an awful lot of permission. I use a lot of dashes because of my illiteracy. I think I wasn't sure, does this need a colon, a semicolon? And I thought, well, I'm just going to steal some dashes because I know that there's a pause there. So even right down to the way, the topography of her poetry on the page, you know, you can just borrow that. But there's always something new to find. You know, they reveal themselves slowly, her poems, I think. So yeah, so from school, age 13, and this is my sister, and you can see the kind of, this is my sister's, you can see the kind of annotations. It's a sin, I think, to mark a book, but we all do. And so all of these, this was, my sister sent me this just the other day, but all of these books were in my home when my mother sort of got rid of them and sent them to a charity shop. But I love soundings. There you go.
And Cori, how about you?
Thanks, Eleanor. I loved hearing about that. I actually came to Dickinson in undergrad. I was a neuropsych major. I thought I was going to go into brain work, and I went into my first neuro class with this professor, Mark Brayford, and he opened on Emily Dickinson. And he often sort of came back to her work in the semester, and we would talk about her use of the word brain versus mind. And I ended up doing a lot of work after that, kind of thinking about literature in the laboratory and science. And Dickinson was this crossover for me, this person who had that freedom. And I ended up pursuing writing more directly, and really only thinking about the science aspects in my teaching and in my own work. So that was kind of my way in. I studied for a semester with a Dickinson scholar, Judd Deppman, who just passed away, actually, who at the time I just was psyched to take the class, but he ended up being a really important person in my life across various moments, just in thinking first just directly about Dickinson, but then about grief. The essay about twins, that essay is what the book is being turned into for Transit Books, is using Dickinson's variants and her thinking through grief. And I was writing back and forth with him about that, and through Dickinson's, a lot through her letters actually to people when various people she knew died. And so Dickinson is kind of invading everything I do these days. Like, I thought it was just going to be in the poetry book that I was working on, but she really, I think, has given me freedom to think about simultaneity and what it really means to feel like you've lost not just people, but like a mode of thinking through something. And I think for me that part of it is the pandemic, finishing this poetry collection, not launching it, not having space for it, and working on essays. I sort of like, when you're in another genre, it does feel a little bit like you've lost like a person you're talking to. And I think Dickinson, and thinking through religion and this way of processing her grief, she kind of had to find a new way to think through that in a different language and different mode. And that really has been kind of the obsession of my work for the last few years and continues to be.
Thank you, Cori, and thank you, Eleanor. There's one question here that asks, how does a poet write about grief? And Cori, you've had some really wonderful things to say about that just now. just parenthetically, I knew Jed Detman a little bit, and he was just a remarkable scholar and human being. So I share your sense of loss. But Eleanor, would you like to comment on your approach to writing about grief?
I knew that when after my dad died, I was dreaming about him a lot, and he was always a younger version of his best self. But they were very, very strange dreams, and I was always going into a room, followed by a presence and to a banquet. And there was always a child crying in the background. And you know the way in dreams everything is mixed up. And so a friend of mine said, just keep a pen and paper by your bed and start writing about it. And so I did. I worried that, I thought, is it cannibalistic to feed on my own grief, to create art and to make something aesthetic out of it? But I also found that it was a way of working through the grief and trying to understand the loss. I remember the first New Year that we had to move into the new year and leave Dad behind because he died in that year, how that was really, really tough. And I remember watching a movie. It was a sort of an end of world with movie, and in one scene, the main actor goes into a room and all of these sort of ghouls are all in one room breathing, and it's a really scary scene. And I remember thinking that that's what it was like, that in that dream, that all of the living were at the barricade waiting for the barricade to go up and go into the new year. And what we thought were fireworks was Armageddon. And then in another part, at another barrier, all of the naked dead and all of the people we'd lost were waiting at, and I have very vivid dreams, we were waiting at another barricade, pushing at it, wanting to come through, but they couldn't. They were barred from coming through. And I could see my dad, and he was just parchment and bone. And so I thought I need to write about that too, because that's part of the grieving. I know when I was a midwife, women who we were told, okay, there's no facility to counsel women. When you're in a position like that yourself, you think this is what, as an 18-year-old and 19-year-old, I remember counseling women who'd had miscarriages or stillbirths. And then when you're in a position like that yourself, what you do is you just write it out of your system. You use whatever metaphor you can. And I remember a reviewer once saying that the metaphor in my work was going to hasten the demise of the planet because it was, I don't know, predatory or whatever. But I mean, you have to write the way you write. And so I found by feeding on the dreams and writing them through and reading a lot that I suppose you don't need permission. You just write what you have to write. It's when you're editing it, you think, okay, now is this legit? Because this has come from a genuine feeling. It's very raw. It's not really a finished poem, but now you're going back to make it a finished poem. So you had that sort of a dichotomy. Well, I had that kind of dichotomy, was this right? Should I just write it for myself and put it away? Is that enough? And I know that Emily Dickinson struggled with that herself because she sought publication, and maybe a work is finished when somebody else reads it, or maybe somebody finds comfort by reading that somebody has been in a similar position. So I had all of those conflicts. I don't know if people have, or just an ethics around writing about grief.
Yeah, I know that's really really quite telling, I think. And boy, you do have vivid dreams. But I want to sort of get back, sort of work, see how this works through grief. I noticed, Cori, the last word in your poem, "How to Preserve a Spacesuit," was, or the last phrase was "to mend," to make and to mend. And so in writing about, I don't know, these themes of grief and isolation or dislocation, kind of emotional violence or fear or even terror. I mean, and I see some of that in the work both of you have shared with us tonight. How does expressing grief or working with grief in a poem, does it help to mend? I mean, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sorry, my computer went in unmute. I don't know. I think it shifts across time. Like, I think I really was thinking through my own grandmother, like make, do, and mend, and my own penchant for like saving everything. Like if something comes with a tag on it and I take the tag off, then I keep that ribbon and then we'll like use that ribbon elsewhere. And I always reuse it. It's not like I'm hoarding it and then just like doing nothing. Like I'm like, oh yeah, I have that like weird ribbon that I saved over here. And I think of grief a little bit that way. Like it has expanded my capacity for love by tenfold. And also the mending is in the book is what I thought the action was. It's like a mending of a tear. But what I'm working on now is more thinking about it as an alteration, not so much like something that gets fixed, but rather is something small that is altered that because you love something and you're caring for it across time, or you get something like a vintage item and someone else has cared for it, and you might notice that like a button was moved during maternity that like gets moved back. And so I think grief now, I think of it as an alteration, but that's a positive one that is a way of caring and caretaking both oneself and our community and our people. And I think that that's equally important. Like there is a process of mending, but it doesn't return it or necessarily even strengthen it so much as preserve it to move forward. And I think that's really mattered to me, especially in thinking about the pandemic, and just the length and the amount of loss. We are all altered now. The world is altered. And I think knowing in some way how to move forward in that altered shape, rather than this idea that we have to just repair and move forward. So I do believe in mending, but I also think there are different sort of language around that in the last couple of years.
Yeah, thank you. So as alteration, I like that. I like that image. It's a very helpful nuance, I think, on mending. And Eleanor, how about you? In your writing through grief.
I think I love that idea of alteration, because you are altered by it. You know, there's a kind of a hole in the world left by the person who's gone, and empty chairs. But I like the idea of getting beyond it. I think it's getting through something rather than getting over it. And I also think that there's an expectation by the world on how you should grieve. And they think, okay, time's up. You should be back to yourself now. And actually, grief is just a character that ambushes you when you're least expecting it. My brother sent me a poem the other day, and I was reading it, and he sent me an essay, and every single line of the essay, my father was smiling out at me. And I said to John, how come Dad's in your essay? And he said, I don't know, I found the same thing. So I think you have to be open and allow yourself to go with it. You know, you have to just let the door open and let it come through. People who resist it or bury it, I think it just emerges in other ways, and possibly negative ways. I'm not a psychologist, but I know that, it's okay to howl sometimes, and to miss people, and to talk about them. And the silence that's imposed by other people who are uncomfortable by your grief is actually very unhealthy. So everybody's altered by it. And I think writing it through is great. And sometimes people will read it and they think, oh man, come on, give us a joke. This is a bit heavy. And you think, okay, then read somebody else for a while and then come back to me. I'm getting there. Yeah.
Well, this is so interesting. I had a number of other questions, but I just was so struck by how each of you have dealt with these the experiences that that put a shadow on us, and how they change us. but I mean, we may try to let them go, but they don't let us go necessarily. And that reminds me a bit of an Emily Dickinson poem that I love and that I think has something to do with this conversation. So I may just kind of close us out with reading that poem, if that's all right with you all. And it is a poem about remembrance. You cannot make remembrance grow when it has lost its root. The tightening the soil around and setting it upright deceives perhaps the universe, but does not retrieve the plant. Real memory, like cedar feet, is shod with adamant. Nor can you cut remembrance down when it shall once have grown. Its iron buds will sprout anew, however overthrown. Well, I want to thank you both and just applaud your work and the care with which you approach it and create it and share it. This has just been I don't know, just a deeply, deeply meaningful evening for me. And I thank you both for that. That's a real gift. Let me thank also our audience for tuning in and for participating in the chat and supporting our poets and talking with each other about what you've been noticing. Again, a big thank you to tonight's readers. They are the last readers in our 2022 Phosphorescence Poetry Series. So deep thanks to Eleanor Hooker and Cori Winrock. We've placed links in the chat to learn more about Eleanor and Cori, and we encourage you to check out those links. There are also links to their work, so hoping that you'll purchase their books too from your local bookseller. It's been an amazing year of poetry at the Emily Dickinson Museum. This Phosphorescence series has been really invaluable in igniting that spark for our imaginations in a poetry community. Our Tell It Slant Poetry Festival has also fed a kind of insistent hunger that we've shared for poetry that converts imagination to transformation. We hope that you'll help us to continue to bring Emily Dickinson's voice and inspiration into the world with a gift to support museum programs such as this evening. And to help with that, as we close out, a donation link will pop up at the end of this webinar. Phosphorescence will return next year. And to that end, our call for poets will be going out in January. So if you're a poet or know of a poet who would like to feature in this series, please consider submitting a proposal. Please join us for more virtual and in-person programs in 2023 at the Emily Dickinson Museum. And to learn more about these programs or to sign up for our monthly mailing or to make a donation, visit our website, www.emilydickinsonmuseum.org. So we wish you a peaceful and joyful holiday season, beginning, of course, with Emily Dickinson's recent 192nd birthday last Saturday. Oh, and Susan Dickinson's 192nd birthday coming up on Monday. So we wish you a good night, a happy new year, and pleasure in poetry. Thank you.
Thank you.